Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number LB4311-350-633. This is a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch single acting spring hinge, full mortise, residential weight, lube bearing, steel base, satin brass plated. That's what this is. Translation, this is an incredibly common spring hinge. You're going to see it on residential applications for 1 3/8 doors that will have a 1/4 inch radius, typical template pattern on the screw holes. Very common. Nothing unusual about this. Let's dissect the part number, however. LB stands for lube bearing. It is a maintenance-free, concealed sort of bearing construction specific to Bommer. The 4311, all of that conspires to mean a number of things. It means, first of all, that it's a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaves there that when they're brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. It also means it's the very template of the hinge itself. So there's a link below this video to a document called template, and 4311 is directly related to the specific location of the screw holes, the fact that it is a 1/4 inch radius, the fact that the hinge, the leaf thickness is 96 thousandths. Okay, all of that means 4311. If that number changes, then the layout of this hinge will change. Also available in a 4x4 as well. Since we're looking at the template, all of the other dimensions about the hinge are there, so I won't beleaguer any of those other. I won't beleaguer any of the dimensions in the hinge other than the height, which I'll get to in a moment. So moving on in the part number, the -350, that's the height. Well, that's the size of the hinge, it's not the height. It means that it's a 3.5 inch tall hinge, and the height goes first on hinges like this, and 3.5 inches wide. So it's a 3.5 by 3.5 inch hinge. The -633 means two things. It means first that it's made of steel. This is a steel-based hinge. It also means that that is a satin brass plating on steel. You can get these hinges in a variety of finishes. Prime coat, zinc, black japanned, all of the chrome finishes, the brass finishes, the bronze finishes, oil rubbed, nickel finishes as well. Bommer can make all of that stuff. And that's the entire part number. Now, whether or not this is appropriate for your application, you'll simply want to review that template and make sure that the location, if you're replacing an existing hinge, make sure the location of the screw holes and the 1/4 inch radius corner are what you need. And a 1/4 inch radius corner comes from wood door manufacturers, pre-hangers, people that manufacture wood doors and wood frames generally for residential applications. And when their machinery is routing for the hinges, they're using a 1/2 inch router bit, and that will leave a 1/4 inch radius. Okay? And if they don't go back and square that corner out, which is a secondary time-consuming operation, and leave it, 1/4 inch radius is what you need. Okay? If you were to change this to a 4310, that would give you this hinge with a square corner. It's 96 thousandths of an inch leaf thickness, and that is typical. This is compatible with other 3.5 inch hinges. The vertical axis of pivoting is compatible with them, so you can mix and match. And that brings us to the next question. How many spring hinges do you need on a door? Well, if you're replacing a spring hinge now, or a couple of spring hinges, or even 3 or more, I would follow the guide of how many you already have and are replacing. Why might you replace them? Well, they do fail with enough use, or maybe setting the spring tension too high. Also, people decide to change the finish on their hardware, and their hinge is fine, except it's the wrong color. So, moving down below this video, there is a short guideline of how many hinges you need. And it's actually, if your hinge comes in a box, it'll be printed on the back of the box. Your hinge may not, but there's a link below that outline is there, how many you'll need. So they're really thinking that you're using these on doors no larger than 3 foot by 7 foot. And 3.5 inches is typical for 1 3/8 doors. You can certainly get it installed on an 1 3/4 door, but it would be atypical to see that installation. Up to 70-pound doors, 2 spring hinges and 1 regular hinge. If you get to the 90-pound range, all 3 spring hinges. Now, I'm a fan of all 3 spring hinges, and not for the obvious reason, because quite frankly, in my opinion, these hinges are very inexpensive for what they do. But what you'll notice, if you've installed spring hinges in the past, that you have greater control over the door closing cycle and latching cycle when you've got additional spring power on reserve. Here's what I mean. If you're on the borderline of 2 hinges or 1 hinge not being enough, you'll notice that being able to share the work across several spring hinges gets you to a position where you can better control the actual closing of the door. I'm not a fan of using spring hinges to close doors because it's just a spring. You set the tension and it just will spring closed. I think doors should be controlled hydraulically, not only for the predictable nature of how a hydraulic controlled door closer, whether it's surface mount or floor closer or overhead, the predictable, reliable operation that you'll get out of a traditional hydraulic door closer over a spring hinge. There are just instances when you cannot install anything but a spring hinge. There are times when it's impractical to install anything else. You might simply just have a bedroom door, an unoccupied bedroom in a northern climate, and in the winter you simply want the door to be closed all the time because there's no purpose to heat that room. No one's ever in there. So that's there are installations where spring hinges are actually quite ideal. But they're not ideal in terms of being able to control reliably getting the door closed. Not that this hinge would be used on a fire-rated door, but many spring hinges certainly are. To be code compliant with the fire rating of a door, your door not only needs to be self-closing, but it must be self-latching. And if you don't have enough spring power on reserve, the door may not latch reliably or predictably. Then you don't have a fire-rated door. So more spring hinges gives you the ability to set that tension. I liken it to a tugboat. They don't go very fast, but they can pull a lot of weight. And having lots of stored energy in the spring when you get down to that crucial last 10 or 20 degrees of closing can be the difference between it latching properly and not. Because there's a lot of stored energy when the door is at 90 degrees. But of course, as you get closer to it closing, you've got inertia happening, but you don't have a lot of torque left reserved in the spring hinge. Having more springs will allow you to do that so that you can not force the door to slam closed, close it predictably and reliably and at a relatively safe speed, I suppose, but have enough left there to get it to latch without slamming or not getting all the way closed. If you hear any cranking sound as the door opens, you've got too much tension, and really 3 holes of tension is what they require. And let's jump now to the tension setting. They're assuming that you're always going to set the tension, install the hinge with the tension collar pointed towards the top of the door. You don't have to because it's not handed, but this example is based on that. With every order, you'll get 1 tension rod. With every hinge, you'll get a tension pin. This order happens to have 2 hinges, so there's 2 tension pins. With the tension collar pointed towards the top of the door, insert the tension rod into one of those holes and turn it clockwise. Into one of those new holes, you insert the tension pin. Up to 3 holes tension is what they recommend. That's it. And you'll set that tension after you have the door hung in the frame. So, quite ideal. The installation instructions are also a link below this video, so you'll have no problem being able to draw that information from the site. There's also a link called Certifications and Hinge Selection Guide. It again is a usage guideline, has some information regarding spring hinges, their grade 1 certification from Bommer, etc. Probably the last thing you'd end up looking at, I suppose, once you determine how many hinges to start with. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bommer logo. Right above it says Made in USA, and that is a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. If you have any questions on the Bommer number LB4311-350-633 single acting spring hinge or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us.